Hey there. So today we're going to read How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot. But the Grinch who lived just north of Whoville did not. The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. Now please don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be, perhaps, that his shoes were too tight. But I think that most likely the reason of all was that his heart was 2 sizes too small. But whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, he stood there on Christmas Eve, hating the Whos, staring down from his cave with a sour, grinchy frown at the warm-lighted windows below in their town. For he knew that every Who down in Whoville beneath was busy now, hanging a mistletoe wreath. And they're hanging their stockings, he snarled with a sneer. Tomorrow is Christmas. It's practically here. Then he growled with his Grinch fingers nervously drumming. I must find a way to stop Christmas from coming. For tomorrow he knew all the Who girls and all the Who boys would wake up bright and early. They'd rush for their toys. And then, oh, the noise. Oh, the noise. Noise, noise, noise. That's one thing he hated. The noise, noise, noise. Then the Whos, young and old, would sit down for a feast. And they'd feast, and they'd feast, and they'd feast, feast, feast. They would feast on Who pudding and rare Who roast beast, which was something the Grinch couldn't stand in the least. And then they'd do something he liked least of all. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, would stand close together, the Whos' Christmas bells ringing. They'd stand hand in hand, and the Whos would start singing. They'd sing, and they'd sing, and they'd sing, 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 sing. And the more the Grinch thought of this, Who Christmas sing, the more the Grinch thought, I must stop this whole thing. Why, for 43 years, I've put up with it now. I must stop this Christmas coming. But how? Then he got an idea. An awful idea. The Grinch. What a wonderful, awful idea. I know just what to do. The Grinch laughed in his throat. And he made a quick Santa Claus hat and a coat. And he chuckled and clucked. What a great Grinchy trick. With his coat and his hat, I look just like Sick Nick. All I need is a reindeer. The Grinch looked around. But since reindeer were scarce, there were none to be found. Did that stop the Grinch? No. The Grinch simply said, if I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead. So he called his dog Max. Then he took some red thread and he tied a big horn to the top of his head. Then he loaded some bags and some old empty sacks on a ramshackle sleigh, and he hitched up old Max. Then the Grinch said, giddy up, and the sleigh started down towards the homes where the Whos lay snoozing in their town. All their windows were dark. Quiet snow filled the air. All the Whos were all dreaming sweet dreams without care. Then he came to the first little house on the square. This is stop number 1. The Grinch claws hissed, and he climbed to the roof, empty bags in his fist. Then he slid down the chimney, a rather tight pinch. But if Santa could do it, then so could the Grinch. He got stuck only once, for a moment or two. Then he stuck his head out the fireplace flue. The little Who stocking all hung in a row. These stockings, he grinned, are the first things to go. Then he slithered and slunk, with a smile most unpleasant, around the whole room, and he took every present. Pop guns and bicycles, roller skates and drums, checkerboards, tricycles, popcorn and plums. And he stuffed them in a bag. Then the Grinch very nimbly stuffed all the bags, one by one, up the chimney. Then he slunk to the icebox. He took the Who's feast. He took the Who pudding. He took the roast beast. He cleaned up the icebox as quick as a flash. Why, that Grinch even took the last can of Who hash. Then he stuffed all the food up the chimney with the glee. And now, grinned the Grinch, I will stuff up the tree. Then the Grinch grabbed the tree and he started to shove when he heard a small little coo of a dove. He turned around fast and Who saw small Who, Cindy Lou Who. She was no more than 2. The Grinch had been caught by this tiny Who daughter who'd got out of bed for a cup of cold water. She stared at the Grinch and said, Santa Claus, why? Why are you taking our Christmas tree? Why? But you know, that old Grinch was so smart and so slick, he thought up a lie, and he thought it up quick. Why, my sweet little tot, the fake Santa Claus lied, there's a light on this tree that won't light on one side. So I'm taking it home to my workshop, my dear. I'll fix it up there, and then I'll bring it back here. And this fib fooled the child. Then he patted her head. Then he got her drink, and he sent her to bed. Then Cindy Lou Who went to bed with her cup. He went up the chimney and stuffed the tree up. Then the last thing he took was a log by their fire. Then he went up the chimney himself, the old liar. On the walls he left nothing but hooks and some wire. Then one speck of food that he left in the house was a crumb that was even too small for a mouse. Then he did the same thing to the other Who houses, leaving crumbs too small for the other Who's mouses. It was 15:15 dawn, and all the Who's still in a bed, all the Who's still a snooze, when he packed up his sled. Packed up with their presents, the ribbons, the wrappings, the tags and the tinsels, the trimmings, the trappings. 300 feet up the side of Mount Crumpet, he rode with his load to the tip top to dump it. Hoo-hoo to the Who's. He was graciously humming. They're finding out there's no Christmas is coming. They're just waking up. I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open for a minute or two. Then the Who's down in Whoville will cry all boo-hoo. That's a noise, grinned the Grinch, that I simply must hear. So he paused, and the Grinch put a hand to his ear. Then he did hear a sound rising over the snow. It started in low, then it started to grow. But the sound wasn't sad. Why, this sounded merry. It couldn't be so, but it was merry, very. It started down at Whoville. The Grinch popped his eyes. Then he shook. What he saw was a shocking surprise. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came, somehow or another. it came just the same. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he was puzzled 3 hours, till his puzzler was sore. And the Grinch thought of something he hadn't thought of before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, didn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. And what happened then? Well, in Whoville, they say, then the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. And the minute his heart didn't feel so quite tight, he whizzed with his load through the bright morning light, and he brought back the toys and the food and the feast. And he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast beast. Till next time. Talk to you soon.